The moment everyone in the church went silent was the moment I realized my life was never going to be the same again. I was standing there in a white dress that didn't even feel like it belonged to me, my hands trembling, my heart pounding so loudly I thought the entire room could hear it. In front of me stood the man I had been forced to marry, a man everyone in town mocked and whispered about, a man they said was old, strange, and ugly, someone no woman would ever willingly choose. And yet there I was, about to say my vows to him, while the entire town watched like they were attending some cruel spectacle. But what nobody knew, what not even I knew at that moment, was that the truth hiding behind that man was about to shatter every assumption they had ever made about him, about me, and about the kind of world we were living in. When I finally learned who he really was, the secret he had been hiding all along, it didn't just change my life. It exposed the hypocrisy, the prejudice, and the cruelty of the people who had been judging us from the very beginning. And sometimes I still wonder, looking back at that moment in the church, when everything unraveled, did I do the right thing? If you were in my place, standing there with your future hanging by a thread and everyone expecting you to sacrifice your happiness for their approval, would you have gone through with it the way I did, or would you have walked away from it all? My name is Aaliyah Carter, and for most of my life, I felt like the world had already decided who I was before I ever had the chance to prove myself. I grew up in a small town where people pretended to be polite, but their judgments were always hiding just beneath the surface. My father, Marcus, raised me alone after my mother passed away when I was 7. He worked 2 jobs most of my childhood, one at a mechanic shop during the day, and another delivering packages at night, just to keep a roof over our heads. I remember waking up early in the mornings and seeing him already dressed for work, quietly drinking coffee at the kitchen table while reading the same newspaper over and over again because we couldn't afford to buy a new one every day. Despite everything, he always smiled at me like I was the most important person in the world. One day, Aaliyah, he used to say, people are going to see exactly who you are. And when they do, they won't be able to ignore it. At the time, I didn't realize how much those words would mean to me later. Growing up wasn't easy. Our town had a way of reminding you exactly where you stood on the social ladder. Some families had money, influence, big houses on the hill overlooking the town square. Others, like us, lived in the older neighborhoods where paint peeled from the walls and every dollar had to stretch twice as far as it should. But my father never let me feel ashamed of what we had. He believed dignity didn't come from wealth or status. It came from character. Still, the world outside our little home didn't always share that belief. I remember being 12 years old and walking home from school when a group of girls from the wealthier side of town started laughing at my shoes because they were old and worn. One of them said something that stuck with me for years. She said, "People like you should know your place." I went home that day trying to act like nothing had happened. But my father saw right through me. He knelt in front of me and looked into my eyes in a way that felt like he could see straight into my heart. "Never let someone else decide your worth," he told me. "The moment you believe their lies about you, that's the moment you give away your power." For years, those words carried me through everything. Through school, through the whispers, through the moments when people looked at me like I didn't belong in the same spaces they did. I studied hard, worked harder, and dreamed of leaving that town someday to build a life where nobody could define me by where I came from. But life has a strange way of pulling you back to the places you think you've escaped. When I turned 22, my father got sick. It started with small things: fatigue, headaches, days when he couldn't get out of bed. By the time doctors finally diagnosed him, the medical bills had already begun piling up faster than we could pay them. I took on extra shifts at the diner where I worked, but it barely made a dent in the growing mountain of expenses. That was when the proposal came. It arrived not as a romantic gesture, but as a business arrangement disguised as charity. A wealthy local landowner named Harold Whitmore had apparently been watching our situation. He owned half the properties in town and had a reputation for being both powerful and eccentric. Rumor had it he was in his 70s, lived alone in a massive estate outside town, and rarely showed his face in public. One evening, a lawyer came to our door with an offer that felt like something out of a strange dream. If I agreed to marry Harold Whitmore, my father's medical bills would be paid in full. Our debts would disappear. We would even be given enough money to live comfortably. At first I laughed, thinking it had to be some kind of joke. But when I looked at my father's tired face and saw the fear he was trying to hide behind his brave smile, the reality of our situation hit me harder than anything ever had before. The town found out quickly. Small towns always do, and once they did, the whispers began. Some people said I was selling myself for money. Others said I was lucky. Anyone rich would even consider marrying someone like me. A few even treated the whole situation like some kind of twisted entertainment. But none of them understood the truth. I wasn't doing it for money. I was doing it for my father. The day of the wedding arrived faster than I expected. The church was filled with people pretending they had come to support me, but I could feel their curiosity and judgment hanging in the air like a thick fog. When the doors opened and Harold Whitmore walked in, I felt the room shift. He was dressed in a dark suit, his posture slightly hunched, his hair gray beneath the brim of an old-fashioned hat. From a distance, he looked exactly like the man everyone described. An old recluse who had somehow convinced a desperate young woman to marry him. As I stood there at the altar, my heart racing, I wondered what kind of life I was about to step into. But something strange happened when he finally looked at me. For a brief moment, his eyes met mine, and I noticed something unexpected in them. Not arrogance, not entitlement, something deeper, something almost sad. The ceremony began, the pastor speaking words that felt distant and unreal. And that was when everything changed, because halfway through the vows, Harold leaned slightly closer to me and whispered something that no one else in the church could hear. He said, "I'm sorry you were put in this position, but I promise you one thing before this is over, the truth will come out." At that moment, I had no idea what he meant. And if I'm being honest, this is where I want to pause and ask you something. Imagine you were in my place right then, standing in front of an entire town that believed you were sacrificing your future just to survive. About to marry a man you barely knew because it felt like the only way to save someone you loved. Would you have gone through with it? Or would you have walked away, even if it meant losing everything? Because what happened next is something none of us could have predicted. When the pastor finally said the words asking if anyone objected to the marriage, the church doors suddenly opened. A group of men walked in, lawyers, reporters, and people carrying cameras. And Harold Whitmore slowly removed his hat, straightened his back, and did something that left the entire room frozen in shock. He reached up, peeled away what looked like wrinkles from his face, removed the gray hairpiece, and suddenly the man standing beside me didn't look 70 years old anymore. He looked maybe 35, handsome, confident, completely different from the man everyone thought they knew. Gasps echoed through the church. My heart nearly stopped. Then he looked directly at the crowd of people who had been whispering about us for weeks and said calmly, "My real name is Daniel Whitmore, and everything you thought you knew about me was a test." What followed exposed secrets about our town, about prejudice, about greed, and about the people who had judged us without ever knowing the truth. But the biggest shock of all was realizing that the man everyone thought I was sacrificing my life to marry had been protecting me the entire time. And as the truth unraveled that day, the people who once laughed at us were the ones left standing in silence. Looking back now, I realized something my father told me all those years ago was right. Eventually, the truth always finds its way into the light. And sometimes the people who judge the loudest are the ones with the most to hide. If you are on my side in this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were standing at that altar with your entire future on the line. I'll see you all in the next story.